For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Political analyst Oprah Winfrey discusses a reflection on 2018. You say the expectations that President Ramaphosa should have somehow turned Zuma's era into a new dawn in the short period was always going to be unrealistic. Can you talk us through the challenges that you say faces Ramaphosa inside the African National Congress?
Well, I think depending on what class you're talking to, I think one thing in common is the expectation that under President Ramaphosa, the economy or its performance is going to turn around. Given the fact that growth is anemic, there was the expectation that you will see investors pouring money into the country because of how the markets in particular responded to his election in December as well as in February 2018. And of course, the first challenge facing the president is domestic capital, and whether domestic capital is investing in the South African economy, and we know it isn't. Domestic capital will argue that they have not been investing during Zuma's period because of a lack of confidence in the ANC government. Now, there was an assumption that because Zuma is no more as president of the Republic, the hope and optimism that came with the election of Ramaphosa as president of the ANC in the country would deliver greater levels of investment in the economy, both from domestic capital and global capital. Now, that was never going to happen. The ANC still suffers from very high levels of factionalism and factional battles, as a result of which the problem of political uncertainty has not gone away. And it is this political uncertainty which has compromised perceptions about the ability of President Ramaphosa not only to lead the ANC, but also to lead the country effectively.
It is interesting to note that you say President Ramaphosa must be lauded when it comes to the deployment of the criminal justice system to tackle corruption, as well as attempts to clean the SOEs like ESCOM. Why?
Well, he positioned himself, and his supporters have positioned himself as a president of the ANC in the country who would be the antithesis to Jacob Zuma. So to the extent that corruption, rent-seeking, state capture flourished during the reign of Jacob Zuma, Ramaphosa would do the opposite. He would tackle corruption, he would tackle state capture. Those who are facing allegations of corruption would be arrested. The Hawks and the NPA would operate on the basis of a logic that was different from their logic during Zuma's period. And we have seen, for instance, that attempts are being made to turn around the performance of state-owned enterprises, to instill some level of good governance in them, appoint new boards, new leadership in the state-owned enterprises. For that, he must be lauded. The question is whether it is enough. Because what has tended to happen is that we have pretended that the biggest challenges we face in South Africa are corruption and issues of governance, when in fact the biggest challenge we face is inequality and its cousins, poverty and unemployment. Now, if you look at his new economic stimulus package, even the ratings agencies have been bearish in their response, because it seems the ratings agencies are of the view that Ramaphosa is rehashing old ANC plans. And what that does is to give the impression that either he or the ANC or both have no answers when it comes to how we can turn around the performance of this economy.
Oprah, you don't seem convinced by his economic stimulus package. Why do you say it's less than inspiring?
I'm not. I'll give you one example. Take the example of the 400 billion rand that he promises will be allocated for infrastructure development over the next 3 years. We've heard that promise made by his predecessors before. And the question is, why has the state not been able to deliver on this promise? which means one of the challenges he faces is that of improving the performance of the state. But what he wants to do is to re-engineer the state, re-engineer processes within the state, reduce the size of cabinet, possibly reduce the number of ministries. Now, that period of re-engineering is going to coincide with the period the state is expected to deliver optimally on the needs of South Africans. The two are not going to happen at the same time. So there is an extent to which, in the gap between optimizing the performance of the state and re-engineering processes in the state, we are going to see failure.
You also talk about the passing of Winnie Mandela earlier this year, and you say it amounts to the end of an era and the beginning of another struggle against patriarchal oppression. Can you tell us more about that?
The death of Winnie Mandela reminded me of something that I saw in Argentina too, that generations of young people who were not there to witness the excesses of the military dictatorship in Argentina responded when the generals were facing charges as if they had gone through that experience. And what this shows to me is that cycles of oppression, cycles of humiliation are passed on from one generation to another. And in fact, the reality of the past might be felt more sharply by generations of young people who were not there at the time, or generations of people who were not there at the time. When I observed what was happening and what was being said during the 10 days of mourning for the passing of Winnie Mandela, young women in particular seemed to be very angry about patriarchy as a system of oppression and how it affects them. They seemed to be carrying the pain of their mothers and their grandmothers. In other words, the pain of their foremothers. For me, during that 10 days of mourning, something shifted. Not only in the gender discourse, but something shifted in the content of that discourse and how young South African women, particularly young Black South African women, feel about and engage with patriarchy as a system of oppression. And it seems to me that what we should take out of those 10 days of mourning and the shift that I observe in the feelings of young women in this country is the realization that women have reached a point where they feel, and this is a feeling we should share with them, that as long as patriarchal oppression remains a reality, not only them as women, but all of us as human beings, all of us as humanity, will never reach our full potential, which means as long as women remain on the peripheries of human development, as long as women remain victims of patriarchal oppression, our society will never reach its full potential. Unfortunately, a lot of what we heard being said during that 10 days of mourning has died down. And it seems to me that we go through these periods of heightened sensitivity about certain aspects of our human condition, and then we move on to the next thing. And I hope South Africa, going forward, will go back to that moment, that 10 days, and what it means with regard to the struggle for the emancipation of women.
We are meeting you a few days after former Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille launched her political party named Good. Did you see this coming?
Yes, I did. I think she intends to rely much more on the antipathy towards the Democratic Alliance that has developed in the Western Cape. Outside the Western Cape, I do not think in such a short space of time she will perform as well as she might in the Western Cape. Let's see what happens in the next election, that is 2024. But in the 2019 election, I'd be surprised if she got more than 2 seats in the National Assembly.
And lastly, Aubrey, what do you think South Africans can expect at the polls in 2019?
Well, as far as the ANC is concerned, for me, there are only 2 scenarios. The ANC falls below 60%, but settles above 50%. So retains power with another reduced majority. Or, alternatively, the ANC falls below 50%, in which case we have a coalition government. But if you look at the fact that the DA has been imploding for the better part of this year, the DA would be lucky to reach 25%. And therefore, the DA is not going to provide much of a challenge to the ANC nationally. The EFF, on the other hand, has a very good chance of doubling its support. One waits to see whether the VBS scandal will produce incontrovertible evidence against leading figures in the EFF, and if it does, what impact it will have in electoral terms. So I expect the ANC to retain power with a smaller majority. I still expect the DA to be second. I would not be surprised if the EFF doubled its support. Gauteng is going to be very interesting. I would be surprised if the ANC retained Gauteng, and I would not be surprised if Gauteng ends up with a coalition arrangement.
That was political analyst Oprah Winfrey speaking to Crema Media's Polity about a reflection on 2018.